Hello, this is Rod Ovitt with another Take 5, a 5-minute meditation or study that we do Monday through Saturdays here on our Facebook page for Rod Ovitt and for Logos Institute of Biblical Studies. Of course, these are filtering their way out into other venues as well, not just Facebook. And I trust you'll share them with others and listen to them often and make it part of your daily vitamin regimen just to keep us going between Sundays. I want to begin a mini-series today on the concept of when it's not your fault. We carry a lot of burdens in our lives. Childhood trauma, the inner voice, all these things haunt us, some more than others. Things that easily beset us, as the one author of the Hebrews would say. He says that we need to take those and gather them up and throw them off, lay them aside. And for you and me, there are things that easily beset us. Sometimes it's temptation, it's sin. Sometimes it's the thought life. Sometimes it's things that come along and blindside us when we're least expecting it. And yet for others, and perhaps all of us have been in this situation, something that besets us is there in front of us and it's not our fault. And yet we seem to be swallowed up in it. We seem to be stuck in the mire, in the mud, in the yuck of it all. And David found himself in this situation. He was by no means a stranger to affliction. In fact, I ask many times to myself, why did David, God's anointed, spend so much time pursued with threat of death and forced to hide in a cave? I mean, that doesn't sound like an anointed king. Let's consider David's dilemma for a few moments, okay? He was anointed by God to be king. He had faith in his God at an early age. He was a shepherd. He saw God's protection and strength firsthand. It was that pure relationship that thrust him onto the battlefield with Goliath. His faith didn't let him see the odds or the obstacles before him. Armed with just a slingshot and some smooth stones, he simply trusted God. Soon, before he knew it, David was living in the palace and leading royal campaigns. As his success grew, so did Saul's jealousy and distrust. And it wasn't long until Saul tried to kill him. Now we read that David escaped, and he became a fugitive, and his life changed. Fear gripped him, and so did confusion. Isn't it funny how those two are companions so many times in our lives? Fear and confusion, and I think they feed off each other. Sometimes the confusion brings about fear, other times the fear brings about confusion. And I don't think any of us are strangers to either of those, perhaps both at once. And we find in 1 Samuel 20, verse 1, that David confronted Saul's son, Jonathan, who had become quite a friend to David. Perhaps more like a mentor. We understand there was quite a considerable age difference between the two. But a real love bond of familial love grew between them. And I'm quite sure there was a mentor-type attitude. After all, Jonathan was used to the royal life where David was coming in from the pasture. And I'm sure Jonathan took a real liking to this young man. And so David says to him, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to take my life?" And in verse 3 he says, "Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only one step between me and death." Now, do you think David was exaggerating? Not really. When you study the narratives, he had some close calls. And Saul had an entire army of soldiers. And he put a price on David's head, basically. Made him public enemy number one. And in 1 Samuel 22:1, we're told that David escaped to the cave of Adullam. And we observe in the very next verse that his father and his brothers' families all joined him there. Now think for a moment the tremendous level of shame David must have incurred. He had to move his entire family there, move them from their ancestral home in Bethlehem to this cave of outlaws. Overnight, this former shepherd became the most wanted man in the land. It was a fearful thing to be an enemy of the state. It was no longer safe for David or anyone related to him. As far as we can tell, he did nothing wrong, and yet he found himself in this life-threatening situation. Now, I want you to think about that. We're going to come back to this again tomorrow and pick it up. And I want you and I want me to think about this, not that we find ourselves in a perpetual down state, but I want you to realize that sometimes this is a reality for us, that there are those times that life isn't dealing us good circumstance, that we're caught up in something a little bit over our head, and we ask ourselves, where's God in all this? I didn't do anything. It's not my fault. And it's okay to think that. And in the next few days, we'll tear this apart a little bit, and we'll look at God's viewpoint on all of this and how we can help one another and solicit the Holy Spirit's help during these circumstances. All right? Thanks for joining us. Trust in God. Know that there is a way of escape. Know that He knows your situation and He loves you. Don't get down. Look up, trust Him, and have a blessed day.